Good evening, everyone. You're very, very welcome to another Zoom meeting of the Irish-Hellenic Society. And it's my pleasure this evening to remind you that we are gradually getting over our Zoom experience, and we're looking forward to meeting you in the flesh at our lunch, our spring lunch on the 3rd of April, Sunday the 3rd of April in the Royal St. George Yacht Club. And following that, on the 23rd of April, we'll again be meeting for a tour of the Custom House, which has a new visitor centre. This evening, we'd like to welcome you to a wonderful experience which has to do with the Irish Institute of Hellenic Studies at Athens and its new director. The Irish Institute has been going strong now for over 20 years, and when I was on my first posting in Athens, it was the preparations were being made to set it up. There was a lot of administrative work involved. The people who were involved with the idea of setting it up were in the various universities in Ireland, in the Republic at the time. And there was a certain amount of legal procedures to go through, because under Greek law, it has to be approved by their very strict regulations. And eventually the Irish Institute was set up in a building very kindly loaned to them in the Plaka, and has now since moved to what was the former Austrian Institute of Archaeology. So the Irish Institute is one of, I think, at the latest count, 19 archaeological schools or institutes in Athens. And it is the only place outside Ireland where Irish archaeologists can work officially under their own Irish institution. Let me just say that during the month of November, in mid-November, one of the great personalities of Irish archaeology passed away, George Hogan. And George was a wonderful, wonderful person to meet. He was a patron of our society, and he brought us, I'm sure many of you will remember, on the 18th of June in 2011, he brought us to see his own baby, which was Nowth. And the site in Nowth in Boyne in County Meath is a beautiful, beautiful place to see. We had a glorious day, and George was open to receiving all of our questions, and was so generous with his time. We then went on to the Battle of the Boyne site, and we were very, very privileged to be with George in his own home county, County Meath. He was from Nobber in County Meath. He was an institution in its own right. He was the first director of the Discovery Programme when it was set up, and to broaden and to make the archaeology better known to people in general. We salute George, and we give our sympathies to his wife Fiona and to his family. Our speaker this evening, Joanne Murphy, is a Dubliner, and she grew up very near a place where I grew up in Sandymount. She was from Ringsend, so I think our paths may have crossed at some stage on the shelves of the library, the public library in Ringsend. She then went on to study in UCD, where she studied both Irish and Greek and Roman civilization, and went on then to study more things which we're going to be hearing from her more tonight, more about the Bronze Age with Alan Peatfield. And she's speaking to us this evening from North Carolina. And but she's suffering from a certain amount of jet lag, I hear, because she's just come back from Athens, Greece. So I'm going to hand over to you, Joanne, and we're all ears. Please.
Thanks very much, Paddy, and thanks to everybody who has tuned in for the lecture. And I know that you're all very eager to get back in person, but I have to say I'm glad that we're doing the Zoom so I can actually take advantage of this opportunity to share some of my work and then some work about the Irish Institute of Hellenic Studies at Athens. Thanks very much, Paddy. Thanks for the invitation and the opportunity to speak to everybody and to introduce my work to everybody. So Paddy gave me very strict parameters for this talk. He said that he wanted to have an overview of my research. And so that's what I'm kind of going to do. I'm just going to talk about the different areas that I've researched over the years and not get into too deep in any individual area. If you want to have more input, absolutely ask away, ask any questions at the end. about more details, or indeed I'm happy to share publications that I've written on these fields. But for today, it's just kind of like a lovely little jolly journey. So sit back, have a cup of tea, whiskey or wine or whatever your little tipple is, and enjoy it. Mine is sparkling water because it is the only afternoon right here. That's 3:30. So the three main areas that I'm going to talk about are Crete, where I worked on as an undergraduate with Alan Peatfield at UCD and Christine Morris from Trinity College Dublin, and then also where I did my master's in Dublin with Alan. And then after that, I went to the University of Cincinnati and worked at Pylos. And I actually worked at Pylos while I was doing my MA in Dublin as a field project, but then went on after my PhD to do some serious research over there. And most recently, I've moved to the island of Chaos. So we're just going to go on a bit of a little Funderland tour around all these places. So the first place that I went to in Greece was Crete. And I was fascinated by the mythology. I mean, like, seriously, anybody who's going to breastfeed a baby that has a bull's head is going to fascinate and pull you in. So the mythology on Crete is absolutely fascinating, from the Minotaur, from its birth to its ending, the stories of its abduction, but the stories of finding Crete, the re-investigation of Crete by Arthur Evans. And I know several of you've been on a trip, I think in 2014, Paddy said, to Crete with Alan and Christine. So you know their passion for all things Cretan and all things Minoan, and the excitement that they feel and they pass on about the discoveries of Knossos here by Evans and the major palace multi-stories and bull leaping all over the place, and the images on the wall, painting wall frescoes. And so while all these major images and histories and events really pulled me in, I loved the connections with the mainland. I love the connections with these images that went through the islands, like these fabulously painted women. I loved this piece from Zachros. I remember when Alan actually mentioned when I was an undergrad, how it was broken, and then we saw in the Iraq Museum how this has been broken, found shattered into pieces, and it's only a few inches high, right? It's a very small piece, but how people can go and excavate and find something that has been shattered into so many pieces and then put it back together again, and then from that tell an amazing story. So we have equally fabulous artifacts in gold with this epiphanic scene where you have this one theory is this woman in the middle is coming in and appearing to the others that have their hands up in this feeling of adoration and ritual, like pulling her in, come here to us, right? Calling the goddess in. So all these stories really pulled me in, and I wanted to be a barrister. I wanted to be a barrister from the time I was around 8, when my uncle told me I should be one because I talked a whole lot. And then when I went to UCD, and I fell in love with Greek and Roman. And my first year in UCD, I went on a holiday to Crete, fell in love even more, went back, dropped history and continued, much to my father's disgust, dropped history, which was going to be the key to all things legal in Ireland. And I continued with Greek and Roman and Irish for my degree. Then Alan started in my second year and put up a note about going to the British School at Athens. So I went to the British School at Athens to go and explore. And then the following summer, I went and worked with Alan on Crete, with Alan and Christine. But when I started to research, what really drew me in was this connection to home. So this is a picture from the early 70s of people carrying the coffins over the bridge in Ringsend. This is how you know a real Ringsender from a stranger. Now, a foreigner could be somebody from as far away as Pearse Street. And for those of you who are not from Dublin, that is around 500 meters up the road, right? So half a mile up the road and you're a foreigner in Ringsend. Real Ringsender come home and are carried over the bridge. And your success as a person is identified by how many people turn up to your funeral and if you can indeed stop traffic. During COVID, over the last couple of years, they've taken to lining the streets because you have the limitations in the church. And but this identity connected with death and the rituals around death really resonated with me. And so when I started my research, I started looking at death on Crete and looked at two major areas, Moklos over here in East Crete and the Messerat in South Crete. And what's cool about this Moklos bit is that when I got my first full-time tenure track job, a permanent line job, it was at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, where Jeff Soules works, who has excavated at Machlos for 40 years. So I was like totally starstruck by my colleague. I'm like, oh, hi, Jeff. You know, so thankfully he did become, he's a great guy and became a great friend. But it was an interesting tie back into my early starts in Greek archaeology. So I started to look at the evidence for these graves, and I really focused heavily on South Central Crete. For my master's in Dublin, I did both East Crete and South Central Crete. And then for my PhD in Cincinnati, I kind of shifted more from death areas into ritual. Like, how are people using these graves? What are they doing? And this is a distribution of all of the graves in, well, at that point, in around 2000 in South Central Crete. And as you know, you've been there, this is a view across the Meseret Plain from Festos, right? So this is down here in South Central Crete, the home of the Festian Palace. And it looks over this very, very fertile area. So in antiquity and in the modern era, this is a fabulously wealthy place. And the kind of tombs that you're looking at are these tombs that are, they're called a tholos, which means a circular building, right? And those of you who've been to Athens and know the tholos, the main center of democracy in the Athenian agora. But here, the tholos is a circular grave. So you've got this camellary, this one-side camellary. The most basic ones were built with a circular grave, circular tomb. And then later on, there was these antechambers added, and some areas had a flat walk pavement area outside. And the later graves, the whole thing was built as a unit. And they're impressive structures for the time. And yes, they're architecturally impressive, but what was madly fascinating to me was that everybody seemed to go into them. So when I was looking at these graves, my questions were like, what were they trying to do? What was their community trying to do through this communal burial of placing the dead in mass graves that were used for hundreds of years? And so this is a modern cheese hut where they make the cheeses up on Mount Ida in Central Crete. And this is one idea of what these graves may have looked like. Circular buildings with low doors over here, and then the roofs are questionable, either a curving roof or a flat roof with reeves, depending. But here you can see the way they curve in, right? So they're corbelled in. It starts off straight, and then it comes in. So they lean in to make kind of a beehive shape where it's curving up like this. And the very, very small door underneath. So whatever community made this, there was a big commitment to death, and there was a big commitment to burial. There was a big commitment that they were all going to stay together in death. And outside, though, there was these, in some of them, there was platforms that had upturned cups that looked like a group were a small group of the larger group, a subset, were performing some kind of ritual. And so I was looking at this, and I kind of argued that what was going on at these graves was that there was an elite group, whether they were priests, whether they were elders, that kind of was controlling access to the graves and to the ancestors and any of the benefits that came with having access to the dead. Because, sorry, I'm going to go back to that. Because it seemed like if you start looking at anthropology, there's an awful lot of cultures that if they have these formal disposal areas, they keep going for a long time and they keep investing in, that they're using those to argue for rights to lands and resources in the area. So if my ancestors are buried here, do not mess with me because we have a God-given right to this land. And your ancestors might be part of that godness, right? So from there, I moved over to Pylos. And I ended up going to the University of Cincinnati because of this Pylos project. I had applied to all kinds of projects to go and work in Greece. And this project accepted me. And then Alan Petefield very, very kindly decided that if she's going to go to the middle of nowhere with this American, maybe we should meet this American before we send her off with 40 other Americans selected by this single man. And so we get to know him and see what it's all about. And when Alan invited Jack Davis to Dublin, Jack was very, very positive. Like Cincinnati gives money to do a PhD. And this was very attractive to me. I'm one of 5. I'm the second oldest of 5. So the idea that I wouldn't have that, well, my parents wouldn't pay fees or anything like that, because that really wasn't on the table. So I ended up going to this project, really enjoyed all of it, and then went to the University of Cincinnati for my PhD. I did my PhD on Crete, but after my PhD, I started to work on the tombs around Pylos. So Carl Blagan, a University of Pylos professor, the University of Cincinnati professor, had excavated in Pylos starting in the 1930s. The poor man started excavating in 1939. Yep. And then he promptly had to leave Greece, and he did not get back until the 50s, after World War II, after the Civil War and that kind of stuff. So he excavated this area here that's covered by a roof. And this is the so-called Palace of Nestor on the Anno Anglianos bridge. The survey that I worked on as a graduate student showed that as I worked on as a graduate student, I want to make sure that I did not run this survey. I was one of the very low level people on the totem pole here. But we showed that this, the spread of the palace spread way beyond what Blagan thought was actually at this site. And now, as you probably know from the newspapers, the University of Cincinnati have resumed excavation around the site, trying to find the lower town, but they've actually found a new bunch of tombs, which I'll mention later. So this area, deep in the Bronze Age, is probably built around 14 or 1500 BC. And it is, again, a hugely fertile area stretching over to the Bay of Navarino, over the Osmonica Lagoon, over to the famous island of Sphacteria. For those who are historians, this is the island where Sparta, of course, burnt themselves out. They were running up and down, lighting, a handful of guys were running up and down this island, lighting fires, trying to pretend to the Athenians who were on the far shore that there was loads of them. And they ended up successfully burning themselves out. And this is the most famous surrender of the Spartans. Indeed, it is the only surrender ever attributed to the Spartans at this island of Sphacteria. Obviously, much later, around 700 years after the palace of Pylos had been destroyed. So this area, so here is Sphacteria again in the background. The Bay of Navarino is one of the, if not the deepest natural harbors in the Aegean. And this, of course, was important for the Battle of Navarino in the 19th century, working toward the freedom of Greece. But obviously, it was also an excellent harbor in the Bronze Age. And so Pylos was enjoying their illustrious position. The first mention of Pylos in the modern world was by Homer. Homer, the blind poet, famous for Iliad and Odyssey fame. So the Iliad is all about the 10-year war in, well, it's not about the 10-year war. The 10-year war is a bit like the backdrop to the, it's a bit like the Derry Girls. The trouble is just the backdrop to the actual story. So in the Iliad, the war is just the backdrop to the story, because we're really talking about the anger of Achilles. So the Greeks are at war for 10 years. Odysseus, however, has a fight with Poseidon. He's not home for another 10 years. And his son Telemachus, shown here on a much later classical plot, Telemachus decides to sail from Ithaca down to Nestor in Pylos and say, have you seen my dad? Where is my daddy? Do you know where he is? So Telemachus arrives at Pylos. He sees Nestor and his family who are sacrificing on the beach. Nestor sees him coming in and goes, oh, this is clearly a royal boy here coming towards us, a man of strength and richness. And so, true to form with Greek hospitality, he does not ask him any questions. What he does is kind of the ancient equivalent of Tinder. He tells his daughter to bring this stranger into the bathroom and bathe him. It's like, this is some messed up Bronze Age, Iron Age dating mechanism. Here's a stranger, get the young one to bathe him, and maybe we'll get a marriage on our hands out of this single visit. So from the archaeological perspective, when Blagan excavated this palace, within a few days, he found a bathroom very close to the entrance. And so he claimed that he had found the famed palace of Nestor. Whether he found the famed palace of Nestor or not, that's famed in the heroic tales, it doesn't really bother me so much. I just love the story. I love the fact that man found a bathroom, and I love that story in the Odyssey about Telemachus going down, and Nestor's first point of information is like, here, my daughter will bathe you. So this is the huge palace that, huge palace that Blagin excavated. It is, compared to Knossos, quite a small palace. Compared to Mycenae, it's quite a small palace, but it's got everything you need. It's like a small, modernly built Dublin apartment. Everything's packed in there. You've got every single thing you need in this palace. So you've got this elaborate entranceway, you've got a multi-stored building, and here's that, so you go through the entranceway towards the back megaron. We've got storage areas, production areas, feasting areas, halls, residence. And so this is what it looks like today. Well, when Blagin excavated, because now there's a roof on it, an even bigger roof than what Blagin had put on it. But you have the entranceway down here up the top of the slide. I can't find my cursor. Up the top of the slide, the bathroom over here. You'd come through this these hallways towards the main room, which is the megaron. Beyond the megaron, there are all these storage rooms for wine and oil. And this is Pete de Young's famous depiction of what he thought the megaron would look like. We have evidence for a lot of this of these wall paintings around the palace. So Blagin was excavating a phenomenal building, really, really well built, really, really rich, and it's used throughout the late Bronze Age, from LH1 to LH3, give or take around 1500 to around 1200. And I say give or take because these dates are heavily debated. So here you can see the plan. The bathroom's over here. You go through into the megaron, and then all the storerooms are behind it. Another hall set over here. Production areas over here, and are pretty stunning reconstructions. But the Pylians left a lot of evidence of what they were about. We have these fabulous women, very similar to the dresses that we see on Crete, very similar to the dresses that we see at Mycenae, the ones that we see on the islands, these large, beautiful dresses, kind of flounce skirt dresses, and they have exposed breasts. And it looks sometimes like that the way the bodice of the dress is cut, that the actual dress supports the breasts and holds them up. We have beautifully elaborate hairdos, and frequently you can see their jewelry that they're wearing. And when you see somebody from the Bronze Age, I'm talking 3,500 years ago, people, this is not something that you can walk into Dunn's or Penny's, my favorite shop in the world, and buy for $5.99. This is not summer disposable clothing. This is a huge amount of effort to make these kind of dresses. So when you see somebody wearing these kind of dresses, you know you're looking at somebody who is either very wealthy or somehow has access to wealth. So like if you think about a priestess, the priestess herself may not own the garb that she's wearing, but she has access to them. These images also signal not only are these people wealthy, but the person who is able to put it on their walls are really wealthy. So all these images that you see in the palaces are all kind of echoes and statements of wealth of the palace and the power of the palace. We also have this beautiful depiction of a dark-skinned man sitting outside playing some kind of a lyre, kind of harpy, kind of kithara kind of musical instrument. But this depiction of the outside was in the innermost room in the megaron. So even while they're inside this building, they wanted some connections with the outside. So we have a very elaborately built building with a very elaborate decoration, but we also have the fabulous linear B tablets. When you read Blagin, or when I was reading Blagin, you kind of think, wow, it'd be so cool to find these sites. Like he found like a bathroom, he knew he was at like the very famous palace. Then he found this archive room with thousands of linear B tablets, right? And but then the stress of finding all this stuff is huge. So people are very fairy tale-ish about these finds. Oh, it's so exciting. It's like, yes, but the stress of recording all of this had to give the man a near heart attack. Anyway, on the linear B tablets, they're very concerned with palatial concerns. And as you know, linear B was translated in the 50s by Ventris, Chadwick, and a group of them were all interacting, but Chadwick and Ventris are attributed to the with the translations. It is an ancient form of Greek. And so We know they're talking about things were coming in and going out of the palace, and a lot of religious activities. I love the religious activities on these tablets, and how the Wanax gives a gift of perfume to the gods. Oh yeah, and then he gives some to himself, right? So he gets this really expensive commodity, gives some to the gods, and gives some to himself. So we know a lot about what was going on at the palace, and yet we have all these tombs that are scattered around the palace that Blagin excavated. So after I finished my PhD, in conversation with my then advisor, Jack Davis, and his colleague and wife, Sherry Stocker, who were running the restudy of the palace material, we decided that I would restudy the tombs around Pylos, trying to redate them and try and figure out how do they really connect with this development of this palace on this hill in this very rich area. So we've got Thalos tombs here, another one down the hill, and then we have chamber tombs. So what fascinated me about the dead, because once I moved out of Ringsend, I realized, oh, people are using the dead all over, all through time, all the time. It's not just the Ringsenders. Everybody from Ringsend thinks that we invented the wheel. Don't tell them about any other culture, right? And so you start looking at the Egyptians, where they're investing huge, phenomenal amounts of wealth into this idea of the eternal life. You have the Taj Mahal, the greatest love story ever told through death and through architecture, where his young wife died and he built this as a mausoleum to her memory, right? So it is this memorializing of a person through death. You've got Arlington Cemetery, the Vietnam Wall there in Washington, and the propaganda in Arlington Cemetery, like no man left behind. Initially, when it's established during the Civil War in America, it is built into General Lee's farm, his plantation. This is what the plantation, the Lee family farm, was on. He was the leader of the Southern rebels. And so the Northerners built their cemetery on his farm to mark their projected success in the war. You have the Vietnam Wall, where you have this honoring of the dead who have fought for democracy. And yet when these men came home at the time, they weren't even given a hero's welcome. They were booed. And yet this wall that's now standing 40 years later gives the impression that they've always been revered as heroes. So monuments that stand long test of time can tell a different story. You've got the Daniel O'Connell's monument in Glasnevin. And here we have a 1916 memorial when the ambassador of England put a wreath at the graves of the Irish heroes, the freedom fighters of Ireland, and to mark with respect the change in the relations between the troubles of Ireland and England to a more peaceful relationship. And behind all of this, you have the monument of Daniel O'Connell, the Emancipator. And then you have this amazingly elaborate crypt underneath that round tower. So we have this constant echoing of heroism and death, freedom fighters and death, no man left behind, the wealth of a family, the wealth of eternity, the love of that you see in the Taj Mahal. So that kind of makes me think, well, what's going on in Pylos, right? Like, how are they using their dead to make these kind of stories? What we have is two types of tombs. We have a Thalos tomb, which is a large construction. This is what it looks like. One of them would look like on the inside, where you've got the bodies laid out. And then over here, we have earlier bodies just pushed aside with the objects that they were buried with. So they're buried with a lot of wealth that then gets shoved aside to make room for the next burials. We have a similar layout in the less photogenic chamber tombs, which are basically, they excavated into the side of the hill and made a man-made cave. But the way they buried the people was kind of similar. They put them down on the ground, they put a lot of wealth with them, and then they shoved them to the side to make room for the next set of burials. So I had my students and colleagues went and start looking at these graves to see what stories we could derive from re-looking at the work that Blagin did. So we have all kinds of people from everywhere working on these projects. And that's one thing that anybody that runs a project will tell you. This is not for the faint of heart, and it's not something you can do on your own. It's definitely a team sport. You need people. So we watched all of the finds again. We started to do a full catalog of them again. We photographed them, and this was probably one of the most terrifying times you're looking at working at Pylos. We had to put this pot back up on the top shelf of one of these glass display cases. And I was standing on a wicker chair, which you all know from the pain they cause in the back of your legs, with those waffle legs on the back of your chair from every Cafe Neon, every restaurant. And I'm standing on one of them, wobbling, and my photographer is handing me up this large pot. And she's terrified. I was like, but you just have to hand it to me. And anybody who's ever given a driving lesson knows exactly what this feeling is. There can only be one panicked person in a car during a driving lesson. That's either the person who's driving or is the instructor. And the same thing when you're moving pots around the museum. There's going to be one panicked person. So I'm like pretending to be totally calm, like just hand it to me, be totally fine. As I'm standing on this wobbling chair thinking, if this pot falls, my whole career is over. I'm 2 years out of my PhD and it will be just in smithereens, both pot and career. But I'm happy to say that the pot is back on the shelf and happy out. We also have to do, after the photography, we do a lot of drawing so that we can get really detailed views of the shape and the decoration of the pots. Because it is only by giving that detailed documentation or making that detailed documentation and then making it available to the wider world, can you really defend your archaeological arguments. So we have our artists, we have our photographers, we have a lot of students helping us. These are, again, more drawings or watercolors by Peter Young, who worked at both, he worked all over, but two of his main sites were Pylos and Crete with Arthur Evans. So these are two of his famous watercolors of the pottery from these tombs. People were buried with a lot of pottery, but they were also buried with elaborate objects like these large bronze vessels, which you can see these detailed hands on the handles. So they are elaborately decorated, elaborately made, expensive vessels. We also have beautiful, these are gold foil cutouts of owls. We have beautiful Minoan rings that were probably imported from Minoan Crete. We have miniature, this is like 2 centimeters tall jug shape that's probably some kind of a necklace adornment. We have the famous griffin ring, carnelian, amethyst. We also have a huge amount of weapons. And these weapons are really interesting in the story of Pylos and indeed in the story of late Hellenic 1, late Hellenic 2, early Mycenaean Greece. A lot of weapons are being placed in these graves. And also on the seal stones, what we see is a lot of fighting scene where man versus nature, and man is always winning. Well, maybe not always, but most of the time at Pylos he's always winning. So here you have the amethyst seal of 1 centimeter at its thickest point depicted. You can barely see the image, but when you make a seal impression of that seal stone, you can see very clearly that you're looking at a wasp-waisted man here fighting and shoving a sword into the face of this boar that's attacking him. And any of you know anything about boar hunting will know that even now in the modern world, boar hunting is one of the most dangerous sports out there. People every year get killed by boar hunting because their teeth are really sharp, their actual prickles are really sharp. And so here we have these heroes killing the boars. And here we have another one where you've got the warrior under here and his long hair spilling out of this helmet, his best friend, the dog, underneath it with him, and then this beautiful skill of the boar being curved around the full shape of this steel stone. The helmet that this guy is wearing is made out of boar's tusks. And so it is communicating, not only is this communicating his power that he is killing this boar, but it's further communicating. It's like a lot of echoing signaling in these images from Bronze Age Greece. It is echoing his strength by the helmet. He's like, dude, don't worry about me. I've killed loads of these. Look at my helmet that's protecting my long hair, right? So he's telling you like constantly how powerful he is in this image. And here you see it again more clearly with the helmet made out of boar's tusks. And here you can see the tusks depicted on the boar and his extremely prickly hair coming down on top of this guy. We also have a lot of semi-precious stones in the in the graves imported from around the Mediterranean and further afield. But we only find boar's tusks in the Thalos tombs. We don't find boar's tusks in the chamber tombs. And this can be one or maybe both of these things. One, the Thalos tombs in general are a bit earlier than the chamber tombs, and two, they are wealthier. So it seems to be that during that early period, before they had palaces, there was a big push to communicate wealth and status through like a warrior status, so that warriors were the leaders in this society. We also have very limited distribution of seal stones, but we have one in a chamber tomb that kind of so makes it less absolute. We also have beautiful glass beads. And one of the side projects we did was that we did different types of scientific analysis on these glass beads to understand where they were made and where they came from. And we showed that they came from Mesopotamia and Egypt. And we were working with, I was working with nuclear physicists and chemical engineers to do this. And I got to tell you, I loved myself that I was working with chemical engineers and nuclear physicists. It just would make me laugh saying these words, right? But the way our meetings went, we had one woman who was brilliant. She was an interpreter. She was a scientist who spoke normal language. And I'd say, I want to know how these beads are made. And I want to know, can we tell where they came from and how they're made? And the other scientist who understood English, but couldn't speak English, he could only speak science, he would just talk back to me, like blah, blah, blah. I'm like, what? And she'd turn and she'd say to me, Joanne, that one's made of blue. That means that it probably came from this place in Egypt. Like, that's amazing. And I wasn't sure whether, I think I was equally as excited about finding out where the beads were as having an interpreter there who could help me understand the science of it. So we found that these beads were actually coming from Mesopotamia earlier than Egypt, which was really important for how global economics of the Bronze Age was working. Because for a while there, people thought that the Egyptian beads were the ones flooding the market in the Bronze Age, and yet we showed the Mesopotamian ones were earlier. We also did a lot of work about where the ceramic imports were coming. And it seems like the ceramic imports were coming mainly from Laconia, Cythera, and Crete, and then some very minimal amounts from Cyprus. And again, most of this was in the early developmental period before they had a big palace on the hill. And so it seems like in these tombs in the early period, they were using them as battlegrounds. And think about those Victorian cemeteries. We've got these huge monuments to different families about their wealth. And so that's what they're doing in these early tombs. But just like in the Victorian period, once poorer people could have graves, or once poorer people started to bury themselves, or once there was another way to express their wealth, they backed away from the graves. And this is what my study has showed, these fluctuations in how and when people are relying on death to claim status in Pylos. So then terrifyingly, okay, as scientists, we all say, okay, you want to come up with a hypothesis, and you understand that any conclusion you come up with is just a hypothesis, right? And it should be tested. But really, you don't want anybody to mess with your conclusions. So I was finishing until you're well away from them. Like once I'm finished it, it's out, it's published, and I've moved on to something else, you can tear them asunder. You're good for that. But not before I get to that point, because at that point, all of my work would have gone to hell in a handbasket and be for naught. So I was finishing this major work on Pylos, which came out as a 905-page book that is like coming out in a couple of years because it's going to take ages to go through the press. And they started to excavate at the palace, and they found new tombs, which was really exciting, but also terrifying, because they found a couple of more Thalos tombs. And this is where Thalos 4 that you saw earlier. And then in this field over here, they found two more large Thalos tombs. And so I was like, okay, well, I haven't submitted a book yet for press. I published a lot of conclusions, but I haven't submitted the actual thing yet. So if I have to change it, of course I'm going to change it. But so far, what these graves have shown with their preliminary conclusions, even the palace, you can see the tombs, and then the Griffin Warrior grave that is of one of the richest graves ever found in Greece. All of this dates to the early period before the palaces. And so a lot of this, their conclusions, their preliminary conclusions seem to support the conclusions that I've made about the tombs that Blagin excavated in the 30s, 50s, and 60s. So hopefully my book will progress while they're still working on these. And if all of my conclusions are wrong, it'll already be done and dusted away from me. And so I'll just go, oh, that's a shame, I'll publish something else. But this here with this warrior grave that we see, the Griffin Warrior, you can see these beautiful seal stones again, even more elaborate than the ones that Blagin excavated, where you have a similar warrior with a wasp-shaped warrior fighting not a boar this time, but another human being. And he is killing him viciously, shoving that sword down into his neck. So it's absolutely horrible. It kind of reminds me of the scene between Penthesilea and Achilles, probably the saddest love story ever told, where Achilles is in the war. He comes up in the Trojan War. He comes up against the Amazonian queen, Penthesilea. He kills her. He's stabbing her through the neck, just like this guy here. And as he's stabbing her through the neck, he looks in her eyes and he realizes, oh, she's the love of my life. It's like, dude, you should have thought about that before you go out there viciously attacking people. So this is what this scene kind of reminds me of. So while we're doing all this work, we also the museums unfortunately close at 2:30 or 3. And so we have to go and find other things to do. So we go and visit the beaches. We hang out at Olympia, which is 2 hours away. And we get there just as everybody else has left. So we get to practice our racing in the area. We get to have beautiful teas and coffees sitting at the beaches, swimming around, visit Methone, medieval lighthouses, go and visit pirate islands, where we got this boat trip one time and this guy was saying to me, and my Greek wasn't very good at the time, and he's like, did you know that this is all a pirate island? And I was like, I think this is what he's saying to me, that this is a pirate island. But he talked about this island, pirate island protein. The pirates would scribble inscriptions on the walls that nobody can translate even now. And so after this, we dressed up as pirates and had a lot of fun. And then after we finished with my death studies, I have moved to look at the living regional distribution of houses on the Cycladic island of Caia, over here in the Cyclades, just off the coast of Lavrion. And this project I do under the auspices of the Irish Institute. And we started in 2012 and we're still going. We did all the field work and now we're doing the studies. So for decades, for centuries, Caia has been famous for its honey. For hundreds of years, it was famous for its acorns, which they now have reinvigorated, as in making it acorn flour. And it's also famous for its poets. The epitaph of the Spartans at Thermopylae was written by a Caian man. And this is where we are doing our Caia Archaeological Research Survey. We stay down in the port town of Coruscant. And the reason for these photographs is to show you how hard this landscape is to walk on. There is a very thin stretch of flat land, and that is the beach. And the rest of it is these mountains that are covered in scrub and deep, deep, prickly kinds of plants. What you can see here are these collapsed terraces. For a long period of its history, Caia was a very heavily agriculturalized island that had a lot of production of food substances. But then with all the different changes from the shift from the Velamedian oak, they no longer needed for tanning, to tourism, they've shifted away and these terraces have been abandoned, which makes it in some ways a great way for area for survey. The reason I went to Caia to survey, and I wish my sister were on this call, because when I was a graduate student working with Alan and Christine would tell us about her work on Caia. And it just sounded so idyllic that my sister Aoife was the babysitter, and Aoife and I were like, we need to go to Caia. Oh, Caia. And so this stuck with me, how miraculous Caia was. And I don't know who was more excited, me or Aoife, when I told her I was going to do this project on Caia. And so there had been a survey in Caia in the 1980s. And no one had gone back, no one has ever gone back and really systematic tested whether survey is a good way to find sites. So there's two main ways to find sites in archaeology: dig a hole, excavation, or which only tells you about this one building or this one site, or do a regional analysis by walking over the landscape and then plotting it all out. And I don't like the containment of excavation, and I love the freedom of survey. And so this idea of going back and testing this survey, redoing the same survey again to see if we could come up with a similar landscape really appealed to me. So we went back in 2012 and we started to walk over this landscape. This is an example of the kind of site distribution that we are producing. Coruscant is the place that we stay. Irene is the famous Bronze Age site excavated by Kaski at the University of Cincinnati that Christine was working on. Kefala is one of the earliest places in the Aegean of evidence for metal production. This is really important about like control of metals, control and distribution. And then Powers is also another early known Neolithic site. So when you're surveying, what you try and do, or one way of doing survey, is to have people walk in straight lines systematically over the landscape. And then you're bending down and you're picking up all of the stuff that you see, everything. This landscape is littered with broken pots. It's littered with stone tools, small pieces of obsidian. And one of the main advantages of of survey is that it gives you a huge regional view rather than just a site view. What you're looking at is landscape studies, so humans in space, in time. Every time I say humans in space, I just see that Muppet Show, pigs in space, right? But no, it's humans, space, time. And you're looking at settlement patterns and how they're changing over time. Like, so is it a period of pressure from the coast? So people are going uplands, like, are they running away from the famous pirates? Or is it a period of coastal focus? How are they using the land? How is it going? This is what the kind of things we're trying to come up with. And we always dress, with the odd exception, dress like we are ready to go for the jungle, because it is brutal out there. The amount of thorns that you can get ripped at, and you're kind of walking through these oaky fields and you're picking up everything that you see. And we have to train the students to try and be able to see this. As you can see here, this sherd in the middle that I'm poking to with the pencil, it needs a trained eye. And it does not take long to get your eye tuned in to looking at the difference between a sherd, a piece of pottery, and a stone on the landscape, but it does take a bit of time. So once we gather everything up, we wash them, and then we bring them back to our apotheke, which is our processing storeroom. And we find like cool things like the base of pots. We find big tiles. Nobody wants to bring in the tiles. They're too heavy. So this is the area that we walked around, all around the northeast corner of Kea. We first walked them in small tracts, like just small 100-meter stretches, and which is our phase one. And then we put that into a database, FileMaker Pro, that shows us where the densities of the pottery are. And then we go back and revisit the density and do a more detailed inspection or investigation of this area. So the areas that we've walked, like all these light colored areas, we walked them, didn't find anything, so then did not go back to them. So you just go back to find the areas of interest. So we have our students. We would not survive without students. We have our students here on the side of the table. We have specialists here, Peter, who are looking at the pottery, cataloging them, dating them, identifying the color code, and then helping us understand what we see. So here we have a Bronze Age ribbed pithos, and here we have a piece of a loom weight, so indicating got storage going on, and you've got production. One of the things that we're also looking for is any idea of imports, especially with the Cycladic Islands, looking for Minoan influence. And so here we have two pieces of Minoan, very clear pieces of Minoan influence, a tripod leg. So a tripod is just a tripod leg. Well, a tripod is something that's 3 legs, and these tripod legs tend to be kind of triangular shaped, and they came from Crete. So in a certain point in time, in the middle Cycladic to late Cycladic period, the people on this island were changing the way they ate and changing the way they prepared food. They were also using these loom weights from Crete and a kind of a conical cup from Crete like this. We have our classical stuff. We've got, like, in this one deposit, we have a spindle whorl, we have a beehive, we have comb jar. So it's clear that what we're looking at is a very small little household or farm that are making their own textiles, that is keeping bees and then storing them. We have column craters from the classical period. We have mold relief from the late to Hellenistic period. We have archaic classical vases. So we're using all of this to show the changes in the distribution of the landscape. We have very early, like these tools are from the Neolithic period. They probably are around 4,000. They're minimum 4,000 BC. And we are the first people to pick them up. So we go back to our main sites, we read them out, we keep all of our stuff on, our information on iPads. It's a lot of work getting out there. This site here is Kafala. That is the early Bronze Age, well, the earliest bronze production area. And that dates to the Neolithic period. So we rigged it all out with a big grid and we numbered it. And we went out and found all of these amazing stone tools. This single stone tool is worth a story. I was out there and I fell off a cliff. I'm not kidding you. Thankfully, it was a very small cliff. And I landed on my knee. I was about to die in the pain of my knee. And I looked down right to see my painful knee. And that's where this little stone arrowhead was. And I was so excited about the arrowhead that I forgot about the pain in my knee. And so this was like one of the only Neolithic arrowheads that we'd actually found. This is a the Neolithic obsidian arrowheads, and this is a chert one up here. So we also found a lot of slag, a lot of evidence for the metal productions. We have imported stone tools. So we know, we get a lot of detailed information about how they're using the landscape, who they're in contact with, what they're using, what they're doing out at these houses. We also found, very bizarrely, our colleague Jenny Moody identified this site in a cutting in the road. This road actually cut through a Roman house, and we could see the walls in the scarp on the road. And so we went out and start flagging out the finds, and you can see the two walls here and some of our finds flagged on the scarp. So we do this, yes, to increase our understanding of antiquity, but we also do it as a way to bring students to Greece so that we can have a continued field of people who are studying Greece and spreading that love of Greece as it was spread to us. And whether they stay in Greek archaeology or not, we need people out there in all walks of life that support archaeology. And I love this picture, mainly because it's so creative and it's something I would never think of doing. So I just love it. That's Quaylon from Trinity, who went on to do a PhD at the University of Austin in Texas. So what we do for Kea is we bring students from America and Ireland to the island, but we really want them to see some of Greece before we go. And so we do a mini study tour with them. We do a tour of Athens for 3 days, Mycenae, the Northern Argolid, and then we get to the island. And these people are together on the island for 5 or 6 weeks, and they make friends that basically last the rest of their life. And this idea of cultivating the next generation of scholars is something that we at the Irish Institute are heavily dedicated to. It is about supporting scholarship, scholars from Ireland going to Greece to get their research done, but it's also about making those facilities available to everybody and bringing the next generation along. So as you all know a lot about the Irish Institute, so it was founded in 1995, as Patty said. It became certified in 1996. It was at the McCabe House in the Placa, which is very generously donated to us. And then we moved to Notora at this building, which is just behind the Austrian Institute. It's nice to have the Austrian Institute as our neighbors. We have rooms, we have a library, we have a hostel there, we have study space there for people to go. We run a lecture series at the Institute in Athens. We usually do around 1 a month. We also run lectures in collaboration with Dublin. And now thanks to the Zoom, we're sharing lectures from Dublin and Athens. We have theoretical seminars for students. We also run cultural events like this musical event with Ross Daly, mainly usually in collaboration with the embassy. But we also run a phenomenally successful study tour every year. And we have something like 35 or 40 students coming this year on the study tour to let that next generation get out there, be enthused and immersed in Greek society, and come back to universities in Ireland to tell people about how great it is. We've had some phenomenally successful workshops like this one on experimental archaeology that has just been recently published. We have day schools in Dublin. So one here, an example, the migrations in the ancient world. We have events in memory of Seamus Heaney, who was a patron of the Institute and was also very heavily influenced by Hellenic culture. And President Higgins received a book from the Institute when he made his state visit in 2018 to Athens. We run field projects, the KA one you've heard a lot about. We also have a Controni project in Eastern Attica, which is a synergasia, collaboration between the Attic Varia and people who are in charge of the antiquities and the Irish Institute. We have the Kefalonia project, the Prognaticus Pyrgos project in Crete, and sorry, the East Crete Peak Sanctuary project. We are hoping to have and planning future projects. Our upcoming events are Katerina Glaraki is going to talk on March 31st, and Bettina Arnold is going to talk on April 28th. You can contact us through our website to get the Zoom links. And in Trinity College on May 14th, we are going to have another day school, which is going to focus on glass in the ancient world, which is a theme of World Heritage this year. And so I put in a couple of Roman pieces of glass and then this beautiful glass bead from Pylos there to give you an idea of the kind of topics that we'll be talking about. We would love, I know that some of you are members or friends of the Institute, we would love for you to join our community. The members get to, the membership, which is €30 a year, they get to stay at the facilities, they get to get a museum card, they get the newsletter, and they get access to all the lectures. The supporter are more for people who are not going to go to Greece. They get the newsletter. They also get access to all of our Irish and Greek lectures, but they have to upgrade if they wish to stay at the facilities. Our membership is €30 per annum for a waged person, 20 per annum for a student, or you can be a friend for 20. We've also then we also have benefactor friend and corporate friend, but we've reintroduced and invigorated this new idea of membership for a life friend for €250 and a life member for €350. Both of these life memberships currently with this new drive include 2 student scholarships, because what we want to do with our members is to try and encourage that next generation. And it is shockingly surprising how, on one hand, how little it takes for a student to think they can go to Greece, and also how lot it takes for a student to think they can go to Greece. I think many of you are probably of the generation who was like, oh, let's just go to Greece. But students in the modern world don't think that way. They just want to stay at home. And giving them a membership to an institute like this can be a life-changing gift, where they think, oh, I could go to Greece. I didn't think that was for me. And they come to Greece, they start doing research, and then even if they don't stay in the field, they bring that out to the wider world. You can go on the website to get the yearly membership, but then you can email our assistant director through the website for the life memberships. Thank you all very much. I hope this was interesting to you. I am more than happy to answer any questions, and if you have any specific more academic questions, I'm happy to answer them by email or here and send you some of my work. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne, ever so much. That was terrific. And you're very good to allow us to pose some questions to you as well. Just to say that if anybody wants to ask a question, at the bottom of your screen, you can see a chat button. And if you would like to indicate there that you have a question, you can either type up the question or indicate that you'd like to speak, and Theo can open a microphone for you, can open your microphone for you. Joanne, you also corrected a point which I may have mistakenly said when I introduced you that the Irish Institute had moved into what was formerly the Austrian Institute. Not so. I stand corrected. So it's a nearby building, basically, but it's a very unusual building. It's just a few hundred yards from the National Archaeological Museum, so the location is fantastic. And it's a great opportunity. If for those of you who don't know the National Archaeological Museum, it requires days, really, rather than minutes or hours to get through it. And it's of course the most fabulous collection of Greek art on earth, bar none. So Theo has indicated that there are two questions coming up. So Theo, could you perhaps open the microphone?
Microphones are open.
Christina.
Ah, hello, everybody. May I actually is that, am I unmuted? Yes?
No, we hear you perfectly.
Yeah.
You're unmuted. You're unmuted. You're quite right. Yeah.
So great to hear Joanne, who I've known for a long time, to speak about her work. Some of the things I didn't even know of her early career, but of course I'm very familiar with her later project on the island of Care, which is very exciting. And of course I know it because I've been the director before her for the last 10 years of the Institute. So I've seen all the projects that we have, materialize and be very excited, since we had to deal a lot with the Ministry of Foreign of Culture in Greece. So all these projects have to go through the ministry before they are approved. So we have collaboration with the Greek ministry for our projects, including Joanne's project. I was very, very interested in your early research, Joanne, and especially for the bathroom that you highlighted in Pylos, because of course we all know that the greatest bathroom, of course, of all time for the Bronze Age anyhow, is the one in Mycenae, where of course Agamemnon was killed by his wife Clytemnestra and Aegisthus. So it was very great that you highlighted also the bathroom in Pylos. Yeah. So I mean, just to say that the Institute, of course, has been going on for 25 years nearly. We'll have our anniversary this year, and that I hope we all celebrate greatly the 25, we celebrated the 20 years, and now we have to celebrate the 25 years, and you're the director, and this is great. Joanne, I mean, is new at the Institute in that she was never in the committees and so on over the years, but she's added this great energy to it already, having been there just 2 months, so we were really greatly appreciative of her work and the work to come for the Institute. So I just wanted to express my great thanks to her for taking over the job from me and wish her all the best. But I also congratulate her for all the work she's been putting in. I mean, she is very modest because she's not professor, of course, full professor at her university in Gainsborough, and she is actually a brilliant academic, and she's published a lot of books, and she is not only such a lively presenter of her work, but she's also a very serious academic. So I wanted to say thank you, and thank you, Badi, for inviting her, because this is it was a great opportunity to her, and wish her all the best.
You're very good, Christina. Thank you very, very much. Theo, could we have Stella Xenopoulou, who has a question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, please. Yeah, we can hear you perfectly, Stella.
Hi, John, thank you very much for this lovely, exciting lecture and presentation. I think I'm a member of the Institute since it's established 25 years ago. It was at the Irish-Hellenic Society's inaugural meeting that I found out about the Institute, and I became a member, and I stay there every year I go to Greece. I'm Greek, I have houses to stay, but I like staying in the institutes with all my family. And I have to say, it's a great facility. We don't have to carry books because we find books there to read. And it's very inspiring. We meet people that think like us, and we never get away from Ireland by staying there. We're in the middle of Athens, but you have this touch with Ireland, so it's nice. But I wanted to ask you something because I came in a little bit late, and I came in when you were describing the bath that Christina was just mentioned, and it really, I mean, the comments you were making there, and we've heard a lot about the story of Agamemnon and how he was killed and this and the other. And I wanted to ask, do you have any details about how young ladies were bathing young men in that period? This is only coming from the comments that you were making. Okay.
I'm really glad you brought that up. I mean, it's just bizarre. It's like really, really bizarre. And we have another. We have naked Odysseus later on in the Odyssey, where he does hide himself from Nausicaa, but she doesn't seem to be too perturbed at all to come across this foreign naked man, and she's kind of thrilled because I think the more because I was a bit fascinated by all this stuff. It's like, this is so bizarre, but I think that a lot of these women in early societies are living in such closed societies that these foreigners coming in, these strangers coming in, are their only chance to marry somebody from outside the immediate group. And with Nausicaa in the Odyssey, so Odysseus gets washed up in his adventures on the side, on the land of the Phaeacians. He sees a group of girls, he hides himself, he hides his nakedness, and she just chats away to him. Like, really? Okay. And then she all the time she's plotting about how she's going to try and get him. She's going to try and she's hoping to marry him. She's hoping to get him. And so it is very interesting. It's a very interesting insight to something that is a very different way of thinking about things for us, but also what we know about the classical period weddings and the classical period way of treating women, where women were very much kept inside the home during the classical Athenian period I'm talking about. They weren't even really supposed to go out on their own because they would have been thought that they were a prostitute. Like, women who ran their own businesses and ran food stalls in the Agora were kind of treated like prostitutes because they were just kind of common women who weren't being proper citizen women. And so the idea then that a few hundred years earlier that they were letting their daughters bathe strangers is just like mind-boggling to me. And then what did the classical Greeks think of these stories?
Very lively, the speaker, yeah. So I don't know, because they set it so that you can't actually mute myself.
Yeah, thanks. And the other thing I want to ask, may I, Paddy?
Yes, please. Please do.
I saw there the lovely pictures from Kea. I've never been to Kea, and I don't know if it's possible. I mean, I know you organize the tours and the excavation and all that, but it's not possible for us mortals to go there, is it? And look at all the excavations and all that, is it?
Go to Kea, yeah, it's super easy to get to Kea. You can get the boat from Lavria, and it takes an hour. It's really easy. Actually, Kea is an ideal place to work from the industry because the bus to Lavrion goes from across the street at the park, and then it takes an hour to get to Kea, and it's very easy to get around.
And you can see do you bring everything to the Museum of Lavrio, or what? Can we see the findings, the archaeological findings?
Yeah, we have everything in the apotheke in Coruscant, and then you can visit the site of Irene, but we're not working there. But our findings, our objects are in the apotheke in the museum in Lavrion. So technically, we're not have everybody come into the museum, but you could look through a window. So yeah, but yeah, you're
it's not organized. Yeah, it's not. Yeah,
no,
yeah.
They're not very attractive. Like sherds are kind of the kings. These kind of sherds that you find in survey are the kind of things that only an archaeologist could love. And sometimes even then, you know, you need a very skilled archaeologist. I remember one time, one of our experts, Xenia Haralambida, was getting very excited about this sherd. And she goes, Joanne, look, 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 look. And I'm looking and I go, because I'm not a pottery person, right? And she says, it's this type of a crater. And I was just like, great. And she says, it's a crater. And I said, oh yeah, wine, brilliant. She says, no. It was the specific, it was a tiny, tiny sherd, but it was such a specific diagnostic part of that crater that she could tell what type of crater it was. And this crater was from symposia, was used in symposium, which means that they imported this pottery and this rite of practice to the island from Athens during probably the 7th or 6th century BC. And so these sherds are tiny and not necessarily attractive to the naked eye, to the mortal eye, and then even not very attractive to the most archaeologist's eye. You need to have like some of these serious experts getting in there and breaking it down for you. But yeah.
Thank you very much.
Joanne, could I ask you two questions which may be linked or not? One is you, when you were talking a little bit about Kea, you mentioned the word beekeeping and honey.
Yeah.
Could you say something, because I'm a devotee of Greek honey and can't exist without it, and can you tell us about the honey business in your early ages and today? Is it still a feature of life on Kea?
Oh yes, Kea and honey is very popular, and it's abundant. You drive around the countryside and there are all these fabulously isolated beehives where they are trying to gather in all of the blossoms, and the more isolated the better, because the bees need that quiet. And so nowadays, as you know, in Greece, they use these kind of square wooden boxes for their beehives. But in antiquity, they used these quite distinctive shaped jars that had kind of a pocked or combed inside, where the bees would make the hive inside these kind of pocked jars. And so there's a lot of work being done on beekeeping through the ages. And what excites me about the beekeeping is that we have a lot of Byzantine bee hives. We have a lot of beehives that are on our Byzantine sites. And so I have this impression of all these late Roman people, you know, during that, and then later into the medieval period, like doing all this serious farming and being very almost self-contained, because it doesn't seem like, so if you go on Kea today, not everybody has their own beehive, but it seems like in the Byzantine period, each little house would probably have a bit of their own beehive. And so it seems to me like that they're more self-contained and doing their own thing rather than somebody mass producing honey and then trading it around the island. So, yeah.
Yes, well, just a small advertisement for one of our favorite places, Aldi and Lidl. Lidl at the moment are having some Cretan honey on offer from today, I think, you know. But I was down there recently and they had island honey also from Greece, so delicious altogether. So it brings us closer to Greece, definitely. Just one last question, if I may. Eclina has been in the news over the last few years. Can you tell people who may not know where and what Eclina is and what its significance is? And perhaps over the next while, we might be able to get somebody to talk to us about Eclina, because I have somebody in mind.
Yeah. So Eclina is a site that's been excavated by Michael Cosmopoulos, who is an American, but he's a Greek, but now teaches at an American university. And he did a survey. It's very, very close to Pylos. And he did a kind of one hill or mountainish kind of bit over. And he did a survey around that area. And then he started excavating at the site. And they found linear B at the site. They found frescoes at the site. It is an extremely exciting site. And one theory is that it was destroyed as Pylos rose and as the palace of Pylos rose and started becoming more and more dominant in the area. Eclina, during that LH1 to 2 period, or even LH3A, right? So as my tombs are being used, and they're being used as competitive areas of expressions of prestige, there's these sites around the areas that are areas of prestige. But then once Pylos emerges as the center in the region, Eclina is actually destroyed. And so it seems that it's possible that Pylos was just knocking out the competitors. And but it kind of is a fascinatingly exciting site. Yes.
Brilliant, brilliant. Yes, in fact, a small world, because Michael Cosmopoulos was in school with one Panos Loumakis, who was a Greek GP, a member of the society, and who mentioned this fact to me. So who knows, we might be hearing more about Eclinae in the near future.
Very interesting site. A lot of high points.
So, Joanne, I'd like to thank you.
We have to ask about the flower, the acorn flower. What is that?
Oh, indeed.
about?
Tell us more about acorn flower, Joanne.
In the, I don't know, like how many hundreds of years ago, but hundreds of years ago and 400 years, this specific type of oak called the Velanithia oak was being used in the making, in tanning, right? So processing animal hides. And they were shipping it from Kea in bulk out of Greece, around Greece and out of Greece, because this Velanithia oak has this very specific component to it that helps in the tanning process. But then in the 1950s, the German company that was our main recipient of the Velanithia oaks found a chemical that they could use instead of these Velanithian oaks. So the Velanithia oak farming died a death. They were just abandoned. Nobody wanted these oaks. I mean, it must have been terrifying for them. And then a few years ago, this man came from the mainland and he started to renovate his grandfather's farm. And his wife came, and she is really into organic farming. And she also is really interested in kind of heritage farming. So she set up a Velanithia oak co-op. And she got the people who had Velanithia oaks on their lands to kind of harvest their acorns. And then they created this flour, and they make these amazing energy bars and cookies out of it. They're gorgeous. So that's what I have to say about the Velanithia oaks.
Maybe we'll have them in Lidl and Aldi soon.
Yeah, they make them at the Red Tractor. Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Joanne, I'd like, on behalf of all of us in the Irish-Hellenic Society and in the Irish Institute who've been listening in, to thank you for a wonderful introduction to yourself, your work, from Ringsend to UCD to Cincinnati and to Crete, Pylos, and the Cycladic island of Kea, also known as Zia. Very near Lavrion, and Lavrion is what? It's about what, 20 minutes, half an hour from the new Athens airport in Sparta. If you're going in by car, there's very good road connection. So it's easy to get to Lavrion, and it's a very short hop then, what, maybe an hour and a half on the ferry over to something like that, 2 hours, yeah, over to Kea.
An hour. Very
three quarters of an hour.
1 hour, yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. So we're all absolutely delighted to have seen all these wonderful pictures that you've shown from your life in ruins. A great title, by the way. Thank you ever so much. And we wish you all the very, very best for your directorship of the Irish Institute of Hellenic Studies at Athens.
Really
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very, very much. Goodbye, Joanne. Goodbye to you all.